I don't always buy Madden, but when I do, it almost always lets me down. Madden 25's franchise mode is yet another unfortunate chapter in a string of disappointments that dates back at least a decade, to the original Madden 25 in 2014. That entry wasn't spectacular. It's still missing plenty of the things that made the PlayStation 2 franchise modes great. But it was, to my memory, the last time EA Sports showed that they'd invested some serious draft capital in trying to make it something good. If the PS2 franchise modes were Peyton Manning, a Hall of Fame first overall selection, then the OG Madden 25 was Andrew Luck. A good number 1 overall pick that should have been great, maybe even Hall of Fame great if it had been properly nurtured. 2024's Madden 25, on the other hand, is Trevor Lawrence. Undeniably better than the Jamarcus Russell quality offerings of Madden 10 and Madden 11 on Xbox 360, where you couldn't even control more than one team. But still, probably not the guy who's going to bring home a Lombardi trophy. As I see it, the issues with Madden's franchise mode fall into 4 categories. Promising features that were inexplicably cut or sent down to the practice squad, bad features that belong on the waiver wire, good features that need to be expanded upon, and decent features that would be better off in a different scheme. Let's start with promising features that have been cut or demoted. You could make an hour-long video about the many quality features Madden has cut from franchise mode since the PlayStation 2 era alone. But for whatever nonsensical reason, they've also removed some of the good things the recent additions put back in, or made them frustrating to use. Perhaps the simplest is switching between user-controlled teams. In Madden 21, you could do this by pressing down on the right stick and cycling through your list of characters. This was pretty sleek, and as someone who almost always controls more than one team, sometimes even 4 or 5, this made switching between them a seamless process. To change characters in Madden 25, you have to tap all the way over to the last screen, go into User Management, and then select the character you want to control. This is incredibly cumbersome. It should not take this many button presses just to switch from the Browns to the Eagles, or vice versa, especially when it was so much easier just a few games ago. There's no justification for burying it in this menu, the same place you go to adjust morale or expunge cap penalties. This might sound a bit extreme, and maybe it is, but considering Madden's tendency to remove features without reason or explanation, it makes me wonder if the developers are considering removing the ability to play as more than one team from offline franchise mode. Make no mistake, people get on the internet all the time and declare that franchise mode is dead. I don't think the situation is that bad. As I said earlier, it's Trevor Lawrence, not Jamarcus Russell. But if you can't control more than one team in offline franchise, then the mode would indeed be doomed. As it stands, I couldn't imagine making a commitment to playing Madden 25's franchise mode for this reason alone. Because changing between my Eagles team, my Lions team, my Browns team, and my Ravens team would be a fucking chore. Another feature that's missing from the Madden 25 edition of franchise mode is the ability to control a singular player, rather than a head coach or an owner. Unlike switching between teams, there is a reason for this: the revamped and expanded Superstar mode, which synchronizes with Road to Glory, just like back in the good old days. But to paraphrase Samuel L. Jackson, that's a stupid-ass reason. Superstar mode is supposed to be a single-player, curated experience that allows you to focus in on the life of an NFL player, seeing what it would be like to be drafted, deal with the highs and lows of your career, negotiate contracts, and more. Allowing players to control a singular player within franchise mode was a completely different experience. It allowed users to immerse themselves in the fictional football world they've created in a narrower way, to compete with the teams they've built as a coach or an owner. Every year that this option has been available, I've controlled multiple teams and a singular quarterback on top of it. Once the ability to edit draft classes came around, I'd even add this player to the draft and control them starting on year 2 with whatever team selected them. It was fun engaging, and forced me to pay attention to the teams I wasn't running throughout the league. I'll never forget when the Raiders pick came up in the 2022 NFL Draft in Madden 21, and crossing my fingers that they'd select the Heisman-winning receiver from Notre Dame so I didn't have to throw to the likes of Nelson Aguilar and a washed-up A.J. Green. Naturally, the ghost of Al Davis appeared, and picked the second coming of Darius Hayward-Bay, a speed freak with bricks for hands. I got so fucking pissed, but in a good way. The fact that I was immersed in what my fictional quarterback's team did was an accomplishment for Madden's franchise mode. In Madden 25, moments like that can't happen, and that straight up sucks. Notably, Madden 25 and every other one since the recent franchise mode overhaul around the time of Madden 22 has a watered-down news tab. The faux Twitter feed, which has been present since the OG Madden 25, is there, but it's even less appealing than ever. In Madden 21, the news tab included screenshots taken from your games to generate stories about your games. The screenshots weren't great. Many of them were poorly chosen, and at times a bug placed pictures in the wrong games. But it was something, and its faults were reasons to improve it, not cut it entirely. Now, the news tab is more bland than ever before, and to make matters worse, you can no longer sort the news by category. Madden 21 allowed you to filter through national news, team news, and most importantly, draft news, which only happens a few times per season, but is rather important when it does. Madden 25 has reduced this to a single feed, with far fewer updates and no ability to focus on the ones you, personally, are interested in. This was particularly helpful with the aforementioned draft news updates. They tended to stick around for weeks on that filter. Now, they're there for a week or two, and then they're gone. And just to be clear here, because I keep mentioning Madden 21's mode, I did have some fun with it, but by no means was it good. It too was lackluster. But to see the things that it did well fail to make it into Madden 25 is incomprehensible. Wendy's fries leave a lot to be desired, but they're not about to take them off the menu. One of the most heavily advertised additions to Madden 25's franchise mode was the revamped draft presentation. It has issues of its own, which I'll cover in the next section. But sticking with things that were removed, in the previous iteration of franchise mode, the draft was conducted from a stage, just as it is in real life. It wasn't great, but it added a sense of drama and pageantry to the proceedings, and allowed you to very clearly see the name of the player who was drafted and their picture. It's been replaced with a draft board that's good in concept, as it does help you to follow the trajectory of the selection process. But without the players' pictures attached to their name, it was difficult, for me at least, to keep track of who had been picked so far. I'm a special education teacher who loves video games, not Howie Roseman. I don't have the time to study these fictional players that well. Sure, I knew the guys I was after by name, but seeing where the guys you scouted extensively but passed on end up is all part of the fun. The draft board, as it's currently designed, makes that harder to do. And as for what they've replaced the stage with, yikes. In the absence of a true draft stage, it instead looks like Roger Goodell is announcing the picks from the back of a Walmart warehouse. Even Paul Tagliabue and Pete Rozelle had a better setup around them on draft day. Now, let's move on to the bad features, the ones that I think deserve to be on the waiver wire. I don't actually hate the current scouting system. I think it should be blended with the previous one, and the Combine drills and the East-West Bowl game of the PS2 era for maximum effect. But the management of scouts is just silly. Each scout has a set of specialties, and they're pretty scattershot. Sometimes the good ones have experience in things like wide receiver and D-line, when wide receiver and cornerback would make much more sense. And the game literally encourages you to fire and hire scouts in such a way that aligns their areas of expertise with your team's needs. This is strange for a number of reasons. For a game that's making an active commitment to make everyone in your franchise feel like a character, from players to coordinators who can now leave your team and become head coaches of other squads, It makes no sense to treat the scouts like a bunch of interchangeable puzzle pieces. Real teams don't hire and fire scouts like this. The best teams, healthy organizations with winning records, have dedicated scouting departments with professionals who have been in their positions for years. I mean, imagine the Chiefs firing the guy who scouted Patrick Mahomes on the ground level the following season because they no longer needed a guy capable of finding a good quarterback. That, essentially, is what Madden is representing here. That said, it is good that there's a talent tree for personnel development that does benefit the scouts who work for you, no matter who they are. But again, it's just ridiculous to have something like this and stop short of making them real characters. Ideally, this feature needs to be cut and replaced with a true GM character with their own dedicated talent tree and a fleet of scouts that work under them, each with their own positive and negatives, just like with the offensive and defensive coordinators. Obviously, this does run the risk of, perhaps, bloating the mode, but it's far better than trotting out this nonsensical mess all over again. And to be honest, Madden is long overdue for a GM mode anyway. Next, let's talk about the things that were actually good about Madden 25's franchise mode. Despite its misfires, it was nice to see some serious effort put into the draft. The post-selection cutscenes, where your head coaches celebrate the pick, gets repetitive real quick, but it's better than nothing, and somewhat reflects what actually happens in war rooms throughout the country on draft night. If they added 2 or 3 variations of this scene, it would be really cool. The player profiles you see after a pick has been made are nice too, but I wish they were available to us before this point. Knowing that a tight end I've had my eye on was a McDonald's All-American or a talented wrestler would be nice to know during the selection process. Is the type of thing that both increases immersion and builds attachment to these fictional players. Which, honestly, is what keeps people playing franchise mode. If you're invested in the careers of these computer puppet men, something that you can't simply port to the next edition of Madden without wasting a huge amount of time and energy, then you're going to want to stick around. So adding some personality to these dudes, in one way or another, is essential. I'm not sure when exactly game planning and halftime adjustments were added in, at least in a way that adds positives and negatives depending on your chosen approach. But it's a nice touch that does reflect the chess matches that go on inside real pro football games. You could have the best roster in the league, but at the end of the day, sometimes tactics really do boil down to stopping one phase of your opponent's game and hoping that they're either dumb enough to keep trying something that's not working or bad enough that they can't beat you any other way. I don't know what the prevailing opinion is on the new scouting system, but aside from the issues with the scouts that I mentioned earlier, I would classify it as an improvement. It's great that you can set the strengths of different position groups to tailor the draft to your liking, and it's awesome that it runs for the entire season, unlike before, where it only kicked off in week 3. That never made any sense. The college season starts before the pro season, so why would scouting be delayed until the end of September? The fog of war style approach to the scouting, where you'll only have a complete look at the ratings for a small subset of players you've specifically targeted, is solid in that it replicates the unpredictability of the real-life process. As fictitious head coaches and GMs, we love to be able to make informed decisions about our selections, and leave the draft feeling confident that our computer puppet men are going to be the stars we need them to be. But consider the careers of the 4 first overall picks I mentioned earlier: Manning, Luck, Lawrence, and Russell. All 4 were touted as generational prospects on draft day, but only one is deserving of that description. As I write this script, Nick Wright is declaring that Caleb Williams is the best quarterback in the NFC, and he's yet to take a regular season snap. Sure, the guy has plenty of talent, and I think he'll be pretty damn good. But would it really shock anyone if he didn't live up to expectations? If you've watched the NFL for long enough, you know that nothing is guaranteed when it comes to draft picks, even the most gifted ones. By giving us only a glimpse at the ratings of some players, Madden is one step closer to bringing that level of uncertainty to franchise mode. That said, the current system removes some of the attachment to players that was inherent to the old one, where you were encouraged to take more of an interest in particular prospects. Personally, to remedy this, I'd love to see users get more than 3 pre-draft workouts and turn them into, well, genuine pre-draft workouts. Back in the PS2 era, you could run about 10 players through the same workouts you have access to in training camp. Now that those drills are back in the game, and that the auto-generated players have already been rendered at the beginning of the season, there's no reason not to allow us to control them in the pre-draft process. The best player I ever drafted in any Madden game was a running back named Keenan Simmons out of Florida, who I drafted in Madden 07. I knew he was going to be outrageously good because I was able to break my high score on the running back drill with him in his pre-draft workout. He did better than guys like Brian Westbrook and Kevin Jones, guys I broke the damn rushing record with, both the single season and Emmitt Smith's. His scouting report was rough, and if I hadn't taken a shot on him with my last pre-draft workout, I'd have missed out on one of my greatest Madden moments. To make the scouting process really soar, Madden needs to bring this element back to franchise mode. I also love the way the coaching carousel works, with coordinators now acting as true characters that can become head coaches of other teams. It's exactly how it works in the pros, and it's so cool to see that reflected here. Hell, if owner mode was any good, I'd have been tempted to fire that up for my Browns team and hire the offensive or defensive coordinator of my Eagles to lead Cleveland into a new era. Speaking of owner mode, that's a nice segue to our next category: decent features that would do better under a different scheme. Owner mode has been around since the OG Madden 25, but it's become progressively useless over the years. You can maximize profits that can be used to renovate your stadium, build a new one, or if you eliminate the salary cap, buy your way to a championship. But those menus are now more buried and hidden than ever before, to the point where you can go through an entire season without touching them. And you still go through all of the cutscenes and drama of the campaign as your head coach, so there's really just not that much different about it. Ideally, this mode needs to be revitalized into something akin to what it was in the OG Madden 25, and character models need to be created so players can engage in their own storylines that exist separately from the coaches. The same is true of the cutscenes and storylines in general. It's a decent idea, but it's poorly implemented. The character models are especially wooden, and don't seem suited to these types of animations. But more importantly, the content itself is simply unrealistic. No head coach would let themselves get taken to the cleaners the way yours does in press conferences, nor would they ever so arbitrarily set statistical expectations like this. If these segments were done between a head coach and a GM, or a head coach and an owner, they'd be more believable. But to have them happen with journalists beats the hell out of my suspension of disbelief. While we're on the topic, suspension of disbelief is another major problem with the draft. It's cool to see the hug with Goodell recreated in-game. Say what you will about the commissioner, but this has become something of a rite of passage for the players who are invited to attend the draft in person. So it does make sense to replicate it here. But, again, the character models just aren't well suited to these types of interactions, and as a result, it looks like a cutscene from an Xbox 360 game, which is probably because many of these character models have been in use since Madden 10. Seriously, if you go back 14 fucking years, you can find the same damn faces in the auto-generated players. I understand that sometimes you do have to reuse assets, but for 14 years? It's time to upgrade these guys, and if this segment with Goodell announcing the picks is going to work, then it has to be done. And when you get right down to it, that's kind of the core problem with Madden 25's franchise mode in general. There are some good pieces here, and even a few building blocks, but it's continually hampered by features that are outdated, useless, or nonsensical. We deserve a better franchise mode, one that offers a true football management simulation experience, doesn't remove good things year after year, or make a big deal about bringing back things that they cut decades ago. Unfortunately, I have my doubts that we're ever really going to get what we want out of franchise mode. EA Sports has little reason to listen to us, thanks to their exclusive rights deal and their focus on the microtransaction-fueled Ultimate Team mode. But this, of course, begs the question, where did EA Sports go wrong? At what point did they lose their way with franchise mode? Well, I'm currently working on a documentary-style video aimed at answering that exact question by playing every franchise mode starting with the very first one all the way back in Madden 99. So I hope you'll join me whenever that project is done as I take a look at the rise and fall of Madden franchise mode. Thanks for watching. Big shout out to all of my silver and gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Corey Matson, Gustavo Balabi, Lil Caesar, Reed, Pathonian, and Faith G, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time.